So it seems that the Blood Angels army set is one of the best deals on paper in terms of Warhammer 40k Battle Force sets in 2024. The box set, rather appropriately for the Death Company, does have its flaws, but looks like it's going to be a massive demand from Blood Angels players out there. So let's take a further look at the box set's contents, the value of them in context of the Codex release, and a whole bunch of data from real hobbyists to see how people are treating the launch, which are the new Blood Angels kits they're looking at getting, and which ones are the least popular. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where it's been a spectacularly busy week on the channel. New points, new combat patrol reveals, the entire Blood Angels Codex being previewed and coming out, and then to cap it all off, it looks like we've got one of the most popular box sets of 10th edition by Leviathan going up for pre-order within the next 12 hours, depending on where you are around the world. This is the launch week of the Blood Angels army set, so the big one with the new Death Company Chaplains, and then the bunch of Intercessors and the Brutalist Dreadnoughts that you can also field as Death Company now, plus the Codex, upgrade sprues, and the data cards. This one marks the first launch of the Blood Angels range, and the way that they do it is that this box set comes out, and then a few weeks down the line it's going to be the main one where the Codex is available individually, as are all the kits on their own, including the Combat Patrol, new Sanguinary Guard and Sanguinary Priest and things. As mentioned, it is looking like from channel polling that the box set is looking pretty insanely popular. The units do look useful, and for people looking to start or expand a Blood Angels collection, it does look kind of reasonable, though it does come with a big annoying criticism that basically quite a lot of it are sort of standard Marines with an upgrade sprue, where really Blood Angels players really wanted a bespoke unit made for the Death Company. In this video we'll talk through the content of the box set, and then go through a whole bunch of polls for Blood Angels players, looking at how they're treating the release, how they'd rate the miniatures, and which things people are actually looking to buy or pass up. First up, here's just a rough overview of the content of the box. There's new Lamatis and new Astorath the Grim, 10 Jump Intercessors and 10 Assault Intercessors, 1 Brutalist Dreadnought, and then 4 sets of that new Blood Angels upgrade sprue with the Eviscerator on it, quite a lot of bits in them, and the idea is that you could use those to transform all of these into Death Company, though you don't necessarily have to do so. There's then Codex Supplement Blood Angels with its fancy cover, and the data cards for Blood Angels, and all of this is for $230 US, 280 Canadian. It seems that the UK price is actually $145, so a little bit more expensive than I'd thought in previous videos, and that approximately translates to €180. I've not seen anywhere that's an absolute final confirmation on that one though. It could be that it's a little bit more than that, but it's going to be in that kind of region. Just for the top line discount numbers though, compared with Games Workshop's normal products, which admittedly are pretty expensive, the discount in the box set is a pretty good one. I often tend to be a bit harsh on box sets like this and not want to include the price of upgrade sprues into the overall offering, but even if you do that, it's around about 45% off, and that's better than basically any of the Battle Force box sets or army sets that they've released in 10th edition so far, bar the Leviathan box. If I was a bit more generous, and if you're a Blood Angels player who really does value the upgrade sprue and you pay full price from it from Games Workshop, that goes up to 58% discount, and that's way better than Games Workshop normally tend to do. Obviously it's not quite as good as the edition launch boxes like Leviathan, which is more like 75% off in theory land, but to be honest, the big launch boxes always tend to be Games Workshop's absolute best offering. It looks like this one could be, at least on paper, second best to that. I'd always treat theory numbers at least with a pinch of salt though. It is still essentially 23 miniatures, even if you get a couple of new characters or a big chunky Dreadnought, plus a Codex and some data cards and upgrade sprues, and it is still a pricey box set, so it's going to depend if it's worth it to you or not. For the actual launch of it, I'm going to be intrigued to see whether or not Games Workshop actually make enough of it, or whether it sells out straight away. With big box sets like this, usually the best way to buy them tends to be through discount retailers. I've got a whole bunch of them linked down in the video description. Element Games in the UK for usually 15 or 20% off, Gap Games in Australia for 21% off, Fenris Workshop in Canada for 10% off, Wargame Portal in the USA for 15% off, and Tash and Geldeep in Germany for usually 20% off for pre-orders. These are the ones that help support the channel a little bit if you were picking up the box set already, so a massive thanks to anyone using those links. There are plenty of other great discount retailers around the world beyond these of course though. With a box set of where we're not too certain as to how much supply there's going to be, if you are absolutely certain that you want to try and pick one up, it's worth getting there at launch time. For those stores linked below, it's midnight Eastern time in the USA and Canada for Wargame Portal and Fenris Workshop, then 10 AM in the UK for Element Games, midday in Australia Eastern time for Gap Games, and 11 AM in Germany for Tash and Geldeep. The European and Australian times I believe coincide with the Games Workshop's web store if you do have to fall back to that if the discounters do sell out straight away. I believe over in North America the Games Workshop offerings tend to go live at I believe around about 10 AM Pacific time, so more the Saturday morning as opposed to the Friday night. For the first of the polls I did, I asked you guys whether or not you think the army set is going to sell out straight away. It does seem that most of you guys out there are pretty pessimistic, with almost 70% of you thinking that it's going to be gone near enough instantly. Maybe not without good reason, given that the Deathwing Assault box set, which felt like it was the equivalent of this for Dark Angels, basically did. And we have had other ones like basically any of the Kill Team box sets or the Chaos Space Marines Veterans of the Long War one. They were all gone in seconds. It really hasn't been every box set though. The Troop box very much didn't sell out instantly, and that was another army launch box, though admittedly it was probably a bit more niche appeal given that they're sort of merely one subset of the overall TOW offering. Obviously lots of people were intrigued to collect an army of avian birdmen, but it's not got the same sort of broad appeal as Space Marines. I'm honestly a bit unsure about this one. With the actual army launch boxes, Games Workshop does tend to produce really quite a lot more of them versus the launch Battle Force box sets that we had, say with the Chaos or the Orcs. Early reports do sound like they've made and distributed some pretty good numbers, but given that the box set is a lot more popular, I'm really not sure whether it's going to be instantly gone like Deathwing Assault, or have a bit more of a sane pre-order time, or even just have loads of copies of it left over like the Croup box set did, and people can just pick them up at their leisure, which will be the best for hobbyists out there. With that in mind, it really doesn't hurt to be early if you do definitely want one, though as always I'd think logically about that, and certainly don't go playing into Games Workshop's hands and pick things up that you wouldn't otherwise from fear of missing out. In any case, let's talk through the box contents in turn, particularly as we now know the context of the rules in the Codex. Lamates is the resculpt of the Blood Angels Death Company Chaplain. He'll likely be £28 or $45 when bought individually. It's been really strong for Death Company in game, with the -1 damage and the lethal hits that he brings, and it looks like that's going to be exactly the same as it was before, and he's going to be a model that's going to be pretty strong in literally all three of the detachments, being both Death Company, a jump unit, and also doing great with the Liberator Assault group as well. As we'll see in a second, it looks like he's the single most popular out of the new miniature sculpts, at least in terms of looks. The other unique chaplain that we've got is Asterath the Grim, the Death Company Executioner one, who helps calm the Death Company's madness by executing the ones that go a bit too nuts. Compared with Lamates, he had really quite a similar sculpt to his previous model, just going for the more sort of Primaris scaling with a bit more fancy detail and rescuing him from fine cast, otherwise he would have been removed like poor fallen Gabriel Seth. Asterath was a pretty niche pick pre-Codex, and it looks like Games Workshop has given him a boost to try and make him a bit more interesting. He now gets 6 attacks at Strength 7 AP3 with precision and devastating wounds with that great big axe, and now his buffing rule of devastating wound on the charge with massive doom for the Death Company that triggers every time they charge, not just once. I was interested to see which of the new chaplains you guys prefer. It does look like it's a fairly solid win for Lamates here. 62% prefer him and 38% prefer Asterath. Not a unanimous win, but I feel like I'd probably overall agree with that myself. I think they have done well with Lamates. He just looks all very menacing, and I must admit I wasn't personally the biggest fan of the sculpt that he had before. Then we get on to the quote-unquote new Death Company in the box, which as mentioned are essentially Assault Intercessors and Jump Intercessors with upgrade sprues and not a tailored Death Company kit. For me, if anything, I think this was the biggest disappointment of the Blood Angels release. The old Death Company kit was really quite nice and just gave you an absolute ton of bits for customizing and converting characters or giving other units a bit of Blood Angels theme. Hopefully eventually Games Workshop decides to revisit it at some stage with some proper Primaris Death Company, but looks like it'll be nowhere soon and certainly not in 10th edition. In any case though, for the actual kits contained, there's one set of Assault Intercessors, and then 2 sets of the newish Jump Intercessors for 10th edition that Games Workshop came out with Codex Space Marines. The Jump Intercessors are really quite pricey per model, but are kind of godly in Blood Angels at the moment. It's not really the worst to get some of them in the discount box, I suspect. Then the idea is that you pair them with this upgrade sprue, which going by the Dark Angels and the Black Templar ones should be $35 or £21.50 when sold individually. And this box set, if anything, is kind of surprisingly generous with them, giving you 4 different sets of them, which I guess they had to if you're going to give all of those 20 Intercessors in power armor the appropriate shoulder pad and have enough for one Eviscerator per 5. It does mean that you should be left over with a good number of those chainswords and power swords and things, plus a bunch of the other more fancy shoulder pads and the ones for other marks of Primaris and Terminator armor, plus some Inferno pistols and a couple of bits for making vehicles a little bit more Blood Angels themed, though I feel like they could have gone a bit heavier on those personally. For in-game purposes, obviously it's going to be a bit points dependent as to what looks good, but I feel like the Jump Death Company looked pretty interesting on paper. You don't get absolute mass power fists anymore, but per squad of 5 of them it looks like 2 can take power fists and 1 can take an eviscerator, so you still get a fair amount of mid-strength punchy damage to weapons. I guess if you were getting the box and assembling them as Blood Angels, it probably makes sense to field them as Death Company, given that you probably want squads for those 2 jump Chaplains to lead, but otherwise the regular Intercessor variants are still going to be absolutely great in the Liberator Assault group with the Red Thirst rule and now the Advance and Charge. And the jump Intercessors at 80 points seem absolutely amazing in the Angelic Host, jumping on and off the board and doing close range deep strikes, hoovering up objective points and skirmishing and destroying enemy infantry. Then lastly for miniatures, we've got the Brutalis Dreadnought, £50 or $80 normally, and this one was released towards the end of 9th edition. Again, this one is kind of optimistically billed as the Death Company Dreadnought here, even though most of the Death Company theme is added by paint, it would seem. There's a couple of bits from the upgrade sprue, but the crosses and things are just painted in. Having said that, I still feel like it's kind of on theme for the Blood Angels. Essentially, the Brutalis always was the updated model for the Furioso, the choice of fists or talons, but at a Redemptor scale. And the Death Company Dreadnought does look pretty savage in the Codex. The Brutalis gets built-in rerolls to hit, which is kind of mad as it's got built-in rerolls to wound as well. It gets a 6+ feel no pain, though does have the downsides of the low objective control and not being able to fall back if it ventures too far away from controlling Chaplains, and it gets a fairly terrifying surge move of d6 plus 2 inches whenever the enemy decides to shoot it, so potentially could be stood on a midfield objective and then just march up into combat and hit things very hard. Then we've got Codex Supplement Blood Angels, usually $35 or £20, so a bit cheaper than standard codexes, but that's because it's a supplement and it's supposed to be used with Codex Space Marines, so if anything it is a bit of an upsell, and it makes the Divergent chapters more expensive to get rules for than just about any other army in 40k, annoyingly. It's first going to be available here, and then we'll have the individual release alongside the main launch of the Blood Angels, and when they do that, I do feel like it is genuinely a big draw to getting your hands on the box set. Getting rules early is quite a big selling point, though you might be able to find some of these to pick up online being resold on eBay and things. That could be another thing to look out for if the prices that they're going for are sane. This one gets a fun limited edition cover with a Blood Angel hefting a sword aloft there, and then there'll be the more normal cover that's kind of similar to the 9th edition codex coming out after. I did a full review of the book on the channel a day or so back. There's 3 detachments, the Sons of Sanguinius renamed the Liberator Assault Group, a Death Company detachment, and the Angelic Host for all of those movement shenanigans. Out of those 2, I feel like the Death Company one is probably a bit underpowered compared with the rest, but still looks like it's usable enough for more fun and fluffy games as opposed to going for hyper tournament optimized or anything. The datasheets in the book were a bit disappointing though. Several of them were lost, both Tycho's Gabriel Seth, Brother Corbulo, the Furioso and Librarian Dreadnought patterns, and the Sanguinary Priest with Jump Pack. For me, to be honest, none of those were really surprises. The rule in 10th edition has been that the majority of Finecast miniatures that don't have a plastic update when their codex comes out now get retired. There's a good chance that Games Workshop might well revisit them for model releases at some point in the future, though it's not guaranteed and it might not be soon. I feel like the biggest painful losses for people were probably the Librarian Dreadnought, which I have one of myself, and that was a real shame, and Gabriel Seth as the chapter master of the Flesh Tearers. He's a really cool character, and I really hope that at some point they decide to release a plastic miniature for him. He feels like a character of the sort of status where that might happen at some point, though really not too sure when. For datasheets gained, they did gain 3 different captain datasheets, not really in any way making up for the ones that were lost in my opinion, though I feel like they're a far enough easy win to be able to field a captain as Death Company and represent a little bit of bespoke war gear for the Blood Angels with the captain with Inferno pistol datasheets from the new Combat Patrol. I asked you guys in another poll how strong you think the book will be once it's fully launched, and generally the outlook's looking pretty positive for it being a pretty terrifying book to fight against. 65% of you voted that it would either be strong or very strong based on what we know so far, and only literally 6% of people said it would either be weak or very weak. And to be honest, even if they did overcost a bunch of Blood Angels datasheets, it still looks like it would be pretty fearsome just by Codex Space Marine units alone. That new Liberator Assault group, as mentioned, seems to be kind of terrifying. The units can still kick out just as much damage as before, with the big +2 strength and +1 attack on the charge, plus Red Rampage might have trade-offs, but it's still big. But this one gaining the Advance and Charge stratagem is enormous, never mind the other benefits like fall back and charge and fall back and shoot and advance and shoot. Angelic Host looks excellent for scoring points with close range deep strikes and jump pack units bounding on and off the board. Looks really fun to play, to be honest. I'd say the datasheets pretty much all look interesting, with certain characters like Asterath and Mephiston getting buffs. I think I'd be most skeptical as to whether or not the Death Company captains and the Death Company Marines on foot are going to be massively relevant to competitive play, though it is all going to depend on points cost. Then finally for the box set contents, we've got the datasheet cards. These are usually £20 or $35. These ones are the quick reference flashcards that I do find genuinely kind of helpful for quickly looking at stats in game, and say if you're making a cheat sheet or something like that, whether or not they're actually worth the £20 or $35 versus making your own or using third-party rule sources for quick reference is maybe a bit more up for debate. I certainly see people using data cards regularly in games of 40k though, and I have noticed that a few of the other datasheet cards for release codexes in 10th edition have tended to sell out. The Dark Angels ones, for example, don't seem to be available from Games Workshop directly now. I feel like a good chunk of Blood Angels players will get value from them, kind of a nice to have, even if not absolutely necessary, and you can reference rules from the codex. As mentioned, putting that all together, it does seem like the box set has a good discount, around about $350 worth of miniatures, $140 worth of upgrade sprues if you want them, and $70 for the codex and cards put together, around about a 50% discount, arguably a bit less if you don't count the upgrade sprues, and arguably a bit more if you do. Games Workshop's normal Battle Forces and Army launch box sets tend to be more in the sort of 30 to 40% discount range, so it does have good numbers on paper. Let's get into what you guys have been making of this though. And for a few channel polls, one of the ones I asked you were which of these Army launch box sets were the best ones of 10th edition so far. So far we've had 3 of this pattern with the Codex and Data cards in the box, the Dark Angels Deathwing Assault, the Kroot Hunting Pack, and now the Blood Angels Army set. It looks like on the popular vote, the Deathwing Assault comes first by a handy margin, this Blood Angels Army set comes second, and the Kroot are in third place with only a quarter of the vote. Realistically though, the split between the 3 is at least fairly big. Lots of people seem to have valued them for different reasons. Compared with these, the on-paper numbers do seem to favour the Blood Angels a little bit. The discount is higher than the other 2. The Deathwing one was only 32%, discounting the Dark Angel upgrade sprues, and you got less of those as well. For points in the box, it was around about 660 for the Deathwing Assault, around about 400 for the Kroot Hunting Pack, and looks like it's around about 690 for the Blood Angels Army set, though to be honest it might well be higher than that. I've gone a bit conservative with the numbers, given that we don't know exactly what the Death Company are going to be priced at yet. The on-paper numbers do favour the Blood Angels here, though clearly it's not the only factor as to what's important with a box set. People were just massively hyped for Terminators at the start of 10th, plus the Deathwing Knight Terminators did look kind of spectacular in my opinion. I feel like that's why people preferred the Deathwing Assault box overall. The Blood Angels does feel like a similar sort of vibe though, essentially 2 new units, but this time it's 2 characters rather than a character and a squad, and then a bunch of essentially generic Space Marines with an upgrade sprue. For the Blood Angels, it's 10 Intercessors, 10 Jump Packs, and a Dreadnought. For the Dark Angels, it was 10 Terminators. Next up, I thought it was worth asking Blood Angels players, will you actually get one? This one's a vote by 260 Blood Angels players. It looks like the majority of the collectors of Sons of Sanguinius are going to pull the trigger on this one. Around about 2/3 are saying yes and 1/3 are saying no, which to be honest does feel like a pretty high proportion. It looks like the majority of the people feel like the positives outweigh the negatives for this, even with the high price of Games Workshop army sets. They do feel like there's quite a lot of nudges to get this one. A good discount helps, but it does feel like most elements of the box do seem usable to Blood Angels players. Obviously the Codex and Data cards. The upgrade sprues are fairly generous with the offering here, and the Chaplains are new. Though I feel like if we had got a whole bunch of bespoke sculpted Death Company in this box set, the number would have probably been even higher. In comparing the army sets to the rest of the Blood Angels total release, I decided to ask you what sort of kits you were tempted to actually buy. For this one, it does appear that the Blood Angels army set has won out. 240 of you said that you were picking it up. A good number of people say they're actually going to be starting Blood Angels with the army set, but kind of interesting to see how that compares with the other releases. Interestingly, the next most popular was the Avenging Angel that is the Sanguinor. He was almost as popular as the army set, having around about 200 people looking to pick him up. And then we've got 166 people wanting to pick up the Combat Patrol with the new Sanguinary Guard, and then the new Sanguinary Priest, Lamatis individually, and the Blood Angels Captain following those. I'd guess that at least a fair few people who are wanting Lamatis and the Captain might be getting him either through the army set or through the Combat Patrol though. But it is interesting to see which of the miniatures people are most looking forward to adding to their collections, if any. Kind of interesting that the army set wins out of this though, even if it is by far the most expensive thing on offer. Otherwise, looking at the more wide Blood Angels release, I also asked you to rate each miniature for looks. I was interested to see which of the ones you think that Games Workshop's done well with, and which ones have done worse. For the 3 new epic heroes that they've come out with this wave, Lamartes does lead the way. He got an approval rating of 76%, Asterath of 72%, and the Sanguinaur of 65%. Broadly all pretty positive there. And kind of interesting that Asterath really isn't all that far behind Lamartes, even if he did win the vote between the Chaplains earlier. Then for the generic characters, the Captain was pretty well received as well. He feels like he's almost the spiritual successor to Captain Tycho and was ranked about the same amount as the Sanguinaur, with the new Sanguinary Priest done Primaris style on foot not so far behind. I feel like maybe he's looking a bit more practical on Primaris as opposed to more stylized, and that was why he was voted the lowest out of the new characters. Though admittedly it's still a broadly positive reception, and that seems to follow what was said online about him. It's perhaps no surprise what were ranked as the less popular miniatures out of the Blood Angels launch though. The new Death Company with Intercessors plus Upgrade Sprue got a 40% approval rating, and then the Sanguinary Guard got a 37%, really quite massively lower than any of the characters there. I feel like the Death Company were never going to be particularly positive on that sort of side of things, given that they're basically just minimal effort Upgrade Sprue, but it seems that the controversial bits about the new Sanguinary Guard have managed to push them even lower than that. On the right you can see how people rated the Sanguinary Guard out of 5. It still feels like a good chunk of people put them at a 3, so sort of middling. Not particularly crazy about them, but don't outright hate them, but there are a good chunk of people who really don't like the miniatures. And the main internet talking points are where have the wings gone? Perhaps wishing that they'd done something like maybe a slightly more restrained version of the new Sanguinaur miniature. I feel like that would have won them a fair few more points. And also a bit of criticism about the heads of the miniatures, looking maybe a little bit Stormcast Eternal on those death masks maybe. But personally, besides those 2 features, I like them well enough. It is just a shame though, because the heads and jump packs are some of the most prominent things on the models, or perhaps 2 of the things that Games Workshop really needed to get right. I asked you guys to rate the new Sanguinary Guard versus the old ones. I feel like in internet comments and things you often get a bit dominated by the majority opinion. I was interested to see just how unanimous it was though. Kind of as expected, the majority of people do prefer the old ones. A big 61% prefer the older Firstborn miniatures with the stylized wings. Though it is kind of interesting that it isn't really unanimous, to be honest. 20% of people said they're about the same, and 18% of people say they prefer the new ones. Still very clearly an unpopular update compared with some from Games Workshop. They've certainly been a bit hit and miss recently, with cool sculpts like the Vespid and the Aquilons that were received very well, but then we've got things like Kotias and the new Sanguinary Guard. Finally, I thought I'd also throw a rating for Dante and Mephiston into the mix as well. It does still seem that the first 2 Blood Angels Primaris named characters still top the charts in terms of people's reception to them. Dante was top of the vote with a big 83% approval rating, and Mephiston was 80%. Both of these were really well received when they came out, so maybe that's no surprise. But maybe a little bit of a shame that none of the Blood Angels releases this time around have been quite as popular as these. Even if it does look like there's plenty of love for Asterath and the Lamartes, they really aren't too far behind. To be fair, I feel like Mephiston and Dante do well would have been hard to beat in the first place. They're pretty much 2 of the coolest and well-known Blood Angels characters. I feel like far more people are familiar with their stories than some of the rest. Finally, I thought I'd mention the Blood Angels Combat Patrol box set as well that we had revealed earlier in the week. This one's got the new Blood Angels Captain, 2 sets of the 3 new Sanguinary Guard without the wings, and 1 set of Assault Intercessors, which could be run as Death Company on foot. As contrary to what I thought in the previous video, it looks like you do get the new Primaris upgrade sprues as opposed to the old ones, so this one should have 2 sets of the Eviscerators in there, which I guess is how you feel Death Company these days. The box set would be £100, $168 or €130 in line with the other combat patrols, a discount of around about 27% to 40%, again depending on whether or not you count upgrade sprues into the numbers. And I suspect at least 500 points in the box, which would be better than most in 10th edition so far. Though if anything, I suspect it might be a little bit higher than that. I was using a very slightly lowball estimate for the Sanguinary Guard. I suspect the Assault Intercessors would cost more if you fielded them as Death Company. It was interesting to see the reception to the new Combat Patrol. It really seems to have been kind of love or hate. Lots of people genuinely hailing it as quite a good update, where lots of people genuinely saying this is very lazy and there aren't many models in the box. I can kind of see both perspectives really. I asked you guys which ones you thought were better, whether it was the new one or the old one. The new one got 57% of the vote and the old one got 43%. So really quite a mixed reception there as well. On the positives for the new one, it looks like there'll be a good amount more points in the box if you wanted to try and make an army of any given size, and it is just quite nice to have a Blood Angels box with actual bespoke Blood Angels miniatures in there. The Captain's quite a fun sculpt, and the Sanguinary Guard are at least elite Blood Angels jump infantry, which you didn't have any of in the previous one, though obviously their individual miniatures weren't well received. On the flip side though, the previous one does just have more plastic in the box, essentially one squad of elite infantry subbed out for an impulsor, and you do get a slightly better discount on the previous one, and it was generally quite well liked as a sort of intro to Space Marines kind of box set, even if it didn't really have much of a Blood Angels theming besides the upgrade sprue parts. Kind of an interesting release for this one, and I feel like it's maybe nice enough that it could work alright with the new Battle Force box set, so you could get one and then the other, even if you will be going pretty heavy on the Assault Intercessors at that point. I guess it depends on how many of those you have in the collection. Maybe nice to see a box set that just isn't hailed as a flat downgrade though. Most of the other Combat Patrols in 10th edition, generally people have said that the old one was better, so nice not to have that. In any case though, getting back to the launch box set for this week, it does seem that broadly speaking, for Blood Angels collectors at least, it will be a popular release, despite it clearly having some flaws with the Death Company not having their unique miniatures. I guess it is kind of weirdly appropriate for them that they should be the flawed things. I can see the appeal to Blood Angels collectors though. Pretty much all the content of this does look usable, and it's a better discount than most Games Workshop Battle Forces. 2 new characters that no one has the current version of yet, and were fairly well received in terms of looks. Getting the Codex a bit early and at discount isn't the worst. The data cards are genuinely handy for quick reference in game. Lots of people do like to use those as a bit of a luxury, even if they're not strictly necessary. The Intercessors could all be fielded as either painted black Death Company or red painted Assault Intercessors and Jump Intercessors, both of which are kind of great in Blood Angels in the first place. But the fact that you can use them as new style Death Company will probably be a selling point for some, and it means that you could have use for them even if you did have too many Assault Intercessors already. The Brutalis Dreadnought is a kit that not many people have right now, and is essentially the spiritual update of the Furioso Dreadnought, even if other chapters can get their grubby hands on it now. Having a large amount of the upgrade sprues would be handy enough for Blood Angels collectors going forward. Being able to have a few more sculpted shoulder pads for all the other marks of armour out there might be nice enough if expanding from this, and while I wouldn't really count them as a core selling point too much, I feel like again it could be a useful enough thing to have to add a bit more theme to other models going onwards. Overall I feel like there's lots of positives. If only they'd just made the Death Company into unique ones, I feel like I'd be a bit more unrestrainedly positive about it, at least in the context of Games Workshop's other offerings. In any case though, let me know your thoughts on the release. Will you be picking up the Blood Angels army set or passing it up? And will the box set sell out in seconds, or will it be one of those that we can pick up for months to come like the Kroot box set? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. As mentioned, if you were looking to pick up the box set at discount, the channel discount retailers are linked in the video description below, and these are the times when the box set goes live on sale for pre-order: midnight in North America, 10 or 11 AM for the UK and Europe, and midday Eastern Time for Australia. As always, an absolutely massive thank you to those using those links if you do happen to be buying things anyway for Warhammer, whether it's fancy Blood Angels or anything else. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, while I'll certainly keep the regular videos coming. I do tend to post new 40k things most days. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages: seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.